You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength. Those aren't the words of a modern-day therapist. They were written by a Roman emperor surrounded by war, betrayal, and death. That emperor was Marcus Aurelius. And yet he wasn't writing to history. He was writing to himself. Not to look strong to others, but to survive the battle within. Because for the Stoics, the greatest war was never fought with swords. It was fought in the mind. Now, fast forward to today. We live in a time of endless opinions, constant distractions, and pressures to be more, have more, and feel more, always. But in all this noise, a silent idea from ancient times is rising again. What if peace isn't found in changing the world, but in mastering your response to it? That's the heart of Stoicism, a philosophy born not in temples, but in hardship, forged by exiles, emperors, slaves, and survivors. And here's the twist. It's not about being cold or unfeeling. It's about seeing clearly, acting wisely, and standing still while the storm rages around you. But what is Stoicism really? Where did it begin? Why are CEOs, athletes, and even soldiers today turning to this ancient code of thought? Let's go back, not just to the teachings, but to the moment it was born. A shipwreck, a ruined fortune, and a man named Zeno who lost everything, and in doing so, discovered something eternal. The story of Stoicism doesn't begin in a temple or a palace. It begins in a shipwreck. Zeno of Citium, a wealthy merchant from Cyprus, had everything. His life revolved around ships filled with precious goods, his fortune growing with every voyage across the Mediterranean. But one day, fate struck. A violent storm tore his ship apart, swallowing his wealth into the sea. In one sweep, everything he had built was gone. Most people would see that as the end. But for Zeno, it became the beginning. Stranded in Athens with no money and no purpose, he wandered the city streets in search of direction. One day, he walked into a bookstore and picked up a book by Xenophon, a student of Socrates. The words hit him like a revelation. They weren't about trade or success. They were about the soul, the self, and how to live. When he finished reading, Zeno asked the bookseller where he could find someone like the man in the book. The bookseller pointed out the window. Across the street stood Crates of Thebes, a strange figure by any measure, barefoot, draped in rags, and carrying no possessions. Crates was a cynic philosopher who had rejected wealth entirely. In fact, he had thrown his own fortune into the sea long ago, by choice. Where Zeno had been forced into poverty, Crates had embraced it. Zeno began studying under Crates. He admired his fearlessness, his independence, and his ability to live by principle. But something didn't sit right. The cynics went too far. They mocked social norms, rejected family life, and lived almost like outcasts. Zeno wasn't drawn to isolation. He wanted a philosophy for people, not just outsiders. He wanted something that helped you live well within the world, not apart from it. So after years of learning under different thinkers, Zeno began to teach his own ideas. He didn't open an academy or hide away in a private school. Instead, he taught in a public space, the Stoa Poikile, or painted porch, in the heart of Athens. The porch was a place where ordinary people walked, debated, and listened. That's where his philosophy got its name, Stoicism, from the Stoa. Zeno's teachings weren't just abstract theories. They were practical tools for facing life head-on. And they resonated. People listened. They learned. They changed. After Zeno's death, his work was carried forward by minds just as sharp. Cleanthes, who emphasized inner strength and endurance, and Chrysippus, who gave Stoicism its logical and ethical foundation. But Stoicism didn't stay in Greece. It traveled, and it evolved. In the heart of the Roman Empire, Stoicism was adopted and refined by three remarkable men. Seneca, a wealthy statesman, wrote letters on how to remain calm and rational in a corrupt world. Epictetus, born a slave, taught that true freedom comes not from your status, but from your mindset. And Marcus Aurelius, a Roman emperor burdened with war, loss, and betrayal, wrote his private thoughts in a journal, thoughts that would one day be called the Meditations. What made Stoicism endure wasn't that it came from scholars. It came from survivors, people who faced real pain, real failure, and real chaos, and still chose reason over rage, clarity over confusion, and virtue over fear. Stoicism wasn't born in comfort, it was forged in crisis, and that's why it still speaks to us today. If you've ever heard someone say, "Just be stoic," you probably imagined someone cold, distant, maybe even robotic, the kind of person who suppresses all feelings and never cries at funerals. That image is everywhere, and yet it couldn't be more wrong. Stoicism isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about understanding them. It's about learning how to feel without falling apart. The Stoics weren't emotionless statues, they were human beings who lived through wars, plagues, betrayal, and exile. They felt deeply, but they knew that letting anger, fear, or desire control them would only make their suffering worse. Stoicism, at its core, is a philosophy of resilience. It teaches one powerful idea, that we cannot control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we respond. In that space between stimulus and response lies our freedom. This is where Stoicism becomes a practical weapon, not just an abstract thought experiment. Imagine you're insulted, fired, heartbroken, or betrayed. The Stoic doesn't say, "Don't care." The Stoic says, "Don't be ruled." You can feel the sting, but don't let it write your story. Don't hand over the steering wheel of your life to rage, fear, or grief. People often mistake Stoicism for apathy, but in truth, the Stoics cared deeply about justice, virtue, truth, and self-mastery. They believed that character mattered more than comfort, that a good person, wronged or praised, rich or poor, should always return to their values, not their emotions, for guidance. It's not about rejecting the world, it's about facing it with clarity. Seneca once said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." And he was right. So much of our pain comes not from what happens, but from the stories we tell ourselves about what happens. Stoicism challenges you to cut through those stories. It strips away illusions and brings you back to the raw truth. Some things are within your power, and some things aren't. Obsessing over the things you cannot change, that's where misery lives. Peace, on the other hand, begins the moment you focus only on what you can do. You don't need to stop feeling. You need to stop letting feelings decide who you are. Stoicism isn't a shield to hide behind. It's a sword you carry through the chaos, a way to remain grounded in storms, anchored in loss, and steady in triumph. Every philosophy has its foundations, the core truths it returns to when the world gets loud. For Stoicism, those foundations are not hidden in complicated formulas or mystical doctrines. They are clear, practical, and brutally honest. These ideas held together the lives of soldiers, slaves, emperors, and exiles, and they still hold together the lives of those seeking peace today. The first and most important pillar is something called the dichotomy of control. At first glance, it sounds like a term from a psychology textbook, but at its heart, it's simple. There are things you can control, and there are things you can't. Your thoughts, your actions, your intentions, those belong to you. Everything else, the weather, what others say, how they feel, what happens tomorrow, that belongs to fate. Epictetus, who was born a slave and later became a respected teacher, repeated this principle constantly. He believed that freedom wasn't about status or wealth. It was about refusing to let external things decide your internal state. To him, real strength meant learning to let go of what was never yours to command. The second pillar is the belief that virtue is the highest good, not money, not success, not popularity. Virtue, that word may sound old-fashioned now, like something pulled out of dusty scripture, But to the Stoics, it meant living in harmony with reason, with nature, and with the best part of yourself. Virtue was the only true measure of a good life. If you lived with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-discipline, then even if you lost everything else, you hadn't failed. And then there's the idea of living in accordance with nature. But nature here doesn't mean hugging trees or walking barefoot in a forest, although those aren't bad ideas. For the Stoics, it meant understanding the natural order of things. Life involves change. People get sick, empires fall, children grow up. Nothing is permanent. To live in accordance with nature means to stop fighting this truth, and instead to flow with it. Like a tree bending in the wind, you don't resist the storm, you adapt. These principles aren't abstract ideals. They were practiced in real life, every day, by people who had everything to lose. Marcus Aurelius wrote about them in his tent between battles. Seneca pondered them while navigating the deadly politics of Nero's court. Epictetus taught them in a tiny classroom with a limp from a leg that had been broken by a former master. They didn't just speak these ideas, they lived them. And that's the final piece. Stoicism is a philosophy you practice, not just preach. It's not about what you believe in theory, but how you show up when life tests you, when someone insults you, when fortune abandons you, when death knocks. That's when Stoicism becomes real. Philosophy often suffers from being too abstract, too lost in dusty books or ivory towers. But Stoicism didn't come from theory. It was hammered out in real life, under pressure, by people who bled, suffered, lost, and still stood tall. If you want to understand Stoicism, don't just read the principles. Watch how they were lived. Start with Marcus Aurelius. A Roman emperor, yes, but not the kind you see in marble statues. He was tired. He was surrounded by betrayal. His empire was at war. His family life was full of pain. And yet, night after night, by lamplight in his tent, he picked up a pen and wrote in a private journal, not to rule others, but to rule himself. He reminded himself not to be angry when others were cruel, not to fear death, not to crave praise. He wrote not for an audience, but as therapy for his own soul. That journal became the Meditations, a book never meant to be read by anyone. Yet it survives as one of the most powerful texts in human history. Then there's Epictetus. Born into slavery, his body broken by a master, he lived with a limp for the rest of his life. But he taught that no man could enslave his mind. He had nothing, no home, no wealth, no physical freedom. But he taught in a small room with no pomp, and students traveled across the empire to hear him speak. His voice was sharp, sometimes even harsh, but always honest. He believed that we suffer because we expect the world to treat us fairly, when fairness isn't part of the world's job. What is? Your response, your character. And then Seneca, the wealthy Roman advisor to the Emperor Nero, a man trapped between power and morality. Seneca had money, influence, even friends in high places, but he also knew how fleeting it all was. In his letters, he often reminded himself that wealth means nothing if it makes you a prisoner, that death could come at any moment, that simplicity is not a punishment, it's a path to peace. And when Nero finally demanded Seneca's death, Seneca accepted it calmly. He spent his final hours with friends discussing philosophy, as if to say, even now I decide how this ends. These weren't perfect men. They failed, they feared, they stumbled. But when life pressed in hard, they didn't reach for escape. They reached for their philosophy, and that's what made them great. They didn't use Stoicism as a mask to hide behind. They used it as a mirror to look at themselves clearly, to face life directly, and to live with purpose even when everything else was falling apart. In their lives, Stoicism stops being a theory. It becomes a choice, a discipline, a path, one that anyone, even you, can walk. Thinking like a Stoic isn't about memorizing quotes or quoting Latin phrases. It's a mental posture, a quiet, disciplined way of seeing the world. The Stoics trained their minds the way soldiers train their bodies. Every day they prepared not for comfort, but for reality. It starts with a strange practice: negative visualization. Imagine losing what you love, not to torture yourself, but to wake yourself up. Picture your house burning down, your fortune vanishing, your loved ones gone. Sit with that. Not to be morbid, but to learn gratitude. When you realize everything can be taken from you, you stop taking everything for granted. Then there's amor fati, the love of fate. Not just accepting what happens, but embracing it. Whatever life throws at you, hardship, heartbreak, humiliation, you don't just endure it. You say, this too is part of the path. The Stoic doesn't wish life were different. He shapes himself around what life is, and always there's memento mori. Remember that you will die. It's not meant to scare you, it's meant to sharpen you. You don't know how many mornings you'll wake up, so what are you wasting time for? The Stoics looked death in the face, not because they were obsessed with it, but because doing so made them fearless in life. Marcus Aurelius would write short notes to himself each morning, reminders to expect selfishness, rudeness, bad weather, sickness, not because he was pessimistic, but because he wanted to be unshakable. If you expect the world to disappoint you, you're not thrown when it does, and when it doesn't, you're grateful. They practiced journaling, not to impress anyone, but to hold themselves accountable. What did I do today? Where did I act out of ego? What fears drove me? What could I have done better? The Stoic doesn't wait for the world to call him out. He calls himself out, quietly, privately, daily. This mindset isn't built overnight. It's like a blade, sharpened a little more each day, and in time the Stoic becomes someone the world cannot move so easily. Not because they're numb, but because they're anchored, still, clear. In a world obsessed with reaction, the Stoic remains reflective. Where others spiral, the Stoic steadies. Where others chase, the Stoic chooses. Thinking like a Stoic is not about escaping pain. It's about becoming someone who can walk through pain and remain whole. The Stoics lived in a world without smartphones, without email, without 24-hour news. But somehow, they still understood ours. Because the problems they faced, betrayal, pressure, fear, death, they aren't ancient. They're human. And while the setting has changed, the battlefield is still the same: your mind. Today, you wake up and your phone tells you everything. Who's richer, who's fitter, who's winning. You scroll through curated perfection, feeling a quiet sense of failure in your own life. The pressure to be liked, to be seen, to succeed, it never lets up. It keeps you running, doubting, chasing. And this is exactly where Stoicism becomes your armor. When you learn to focus only on what you can control, you stop dancing for approval. You stop measuring your worth by likes, followers, or validation. You start asking, did I do my best today? Was I honest? Was I kind? Did I stay true to what I believe? That's it. That's the standard. Anxiety, it's the product of trying to control the uncontrollable. People's opinions, the outcome of your plans, the future itself. The Stoic sees anxiety not as a disease, but as a misdirected focus. If something is outside your power, let it go. If something is inside your power, act on it. Social media tells you to react instantly. The Stoic pauses. He watches the emotion rise and lets it settle before responding. That pause, it's power. It's the space between being a slave to your emotions and being the master of them. Criticism used to ruin your day. Now you ask, is it true? If yes, you learn. If no, you let it pass. No anger, no drama, just clarity. You start to become untouchable, not because the world stops attacking, but because you stop handing over your peace like it's cheap. Even in relationships, Stoicism helps. You realize you can't control how people love you, how they show up, or when they leave. But you can control how you love, how you stay loyal to your own values, how you grieve with grace and let go with dignity. When life goes wrong, when jobs vanish, when illness strikes, when someone betrays you, Stoicism reminds you this isn't personal. It's life. You don't have to like it, but you do have to face it. And you can, because the Stoic isn't made of stone. He's made of something stronger, a heart trained in courage, a mind sharpened by truth, and a soul that refuses to be owned by chaos. The world will not get quieter, the pressure won't stop, the noise won't die down, but you can become the stillness in the center of it all. Philosophy doesn't change your life in one dramatic moment. It changes in the quiet repetition, the small daily choices. That's how the Stoics practiced, not with grand declarations, but with morning reflections and nightly self-audits. And you can do the same. It begins the moment you wake up. Before the world barges in with messages, meetings, or pressure, take a moment. Ask yourself, what kind of person do I want to be today? Not what you want to achieve, not what others expect of you, just who do you choose to be when life gets difficult? Will you be patient when tested? Will you be honest when it's inconvenient? Will you act with courage when fear shows up? Marcus Aurelius used his mornings this way. He'd write notes to himself, not for the empire, but for the man inside. He'd remind himself to expect difficulty, to remain humble, to remember that everything, fame, wealth, even health, is fleeting. Then comes the day. You go to work or school or face your responsibilities. You interact with people, some kind, some not. Things don't go to plan. You feel tension building, emotions rising. This is your real Stoic training, not the morning reflection, but what you do with it when life stops being polite. You'll want to argue, you'll want to snap, but you stop, you breathe, you remember that how others act is their choice. How you respond, that's yours. Throughout the day, the Stoic brings his mind back to the present. He doesn't dwell on yesterday's mistakes or fear tomorrow's uncertainty. He focuses on this task, this decision, this breath. That's enough. Then the evening comes, and here's where the real transformation begins. The Stoics journaled not for memory, but for mastery. At night, they asked themselves, where did I fall short today? Where did I act with virtue? Where did I let anger win or let fear make the choice? But they didn't do this to punish themselves. They did it to grow, to become better. Inch by inch, day by day. You don't need to renounce your possessions or move to a cave to live like a Stoic. You just need to show up for yourself every day with honesty, discipline, and kindness. When someone cuts you off in traffic, that's your training. When someone lies to you, that's your training. When things fall apart and you stay composed, that's Stoicism in action. It's not about being perfect. It's about practicing over and over until one day you realize the world hasn't gotten easier, but you've gotten stronger. To most people, Stoicism still looks like silence, like a man staring at a fire while everything he loves burns, like a woman who feels pain but refuses to flinch. There's something inhuman about how it's often portrayed, as if Stoics are made of stone, immune to heartbreak, immune to grief. But that's not strength. That's numbness. And the Stoics never asked us to go numb. The strength of Stoicism isn't in feeling less. It's in being brave enough to feel fully and still act with clarity. When Marcus Aurelius lost his children, one after another, he didn't pretend not to feel sorrow. He wrote about it, he wept, but he reminded himself, everything that happens is natural, not always desired, but part of the design. He let the pain pass through him, and yet he didn't let it define him. This is the kind of strength Stoicism offers, not the kind that crushes emotion under a boot, but the kind that holds pain gently and says, you may visit, but you don't get to rule me. It's the strength to face humiliation and keep your dignity, the strength to be wronged and still act with honor, the strength to lose everything and not lose yourself. Seneca knew this. In his final moments, surrounded by guards and awaiting forced suicide, he didn't beg or curse. He spoke calmly to his friends. He asked them to remember his ideas, not just his death. That's not coldness, that's conviction. Epictetus, a crippled ex-slave, told his students not to fear poverty, pain, or insult. because those things can't touch your character. And character, to the Stoic, is everything. The world thinks Stoicism is about pretending not to care, but it's the opposite. It's about caring deeply, about truth, about virtue, about doing the right thing, and refusing to let chaos, cruelty, or loss make you bitter. In a culture obsessed with reaction, Stoicism teaches restraint. In a world addicted to outrage, Stoicism teaches peace. And in a society that rewards ego, Stoicism teaches humility. The strength of Stoicism is quiet. You won't see it in a dramatic outburst or a flashy quote. You'll see it in the person who shows up day after day, steady and calm, even when no one's watching. That kind of strength isn't glamorous, but it's unbreakable. At some point, life will break you. You'll lose someone. You'll fail at something that mattered. You'll be lied to, overlooked, rejected. You'll feel alone in a crowded room. You'll wake up some mornings with a weight on your chest and no clear reason why. And in that moment, you'll face a choice. Let the world shape you into something bitter, or become someone better because of it. That's what Stoicism is really about. It's not an escape from pain. It's an invitation to meet pain with purpose. You don't need to believe in gods or memorize ancient texts. You just need to believe this, that your peace is your responsibility, that your reaction is your power, that your character is worth more than your comfort. The Stoics didn't live easy lives. They weren't sheltered from suffering. They walked through fire and still chose self-control over rage, wisdom over impulse, and courage over fear. And you can too. It starts with one day, one breath, one moment when something goes wrong. And instead of panicking, instead of lashing out, you pause, you breathe, you remember, I can't control this, but I can control me. Maybe the world won't notice, but you will. And over time, that one moment becomes a habit. That habit becomes strength, and that strength becomes your legacy. Because a Stoic life doesn't end with applause or fame. It ends with clarity, with the quiet knowing that you didn't bend every time life pushed, that you stayed true to who you chose to be. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. So try it for one day. Be calm when others shout. Be kind when others mock. Be steady when everything shakes." You might just discover that Stoicism isn't about being perfect. It's about being prepared to live, to lose, and to rise again. If this video stirred something in you, if even a part of you is ready to walk the Stoic path, to grow stronger, calmer, and more grounded, then this is just the beginning. Subscribe to the channel and become part of this journey, not just a viewer, but a thinker, a seeker, a member of this growing family of minds who believe wisdom still matters in a noisy world. Welcome to the tribe. We're walking this road together, one thought, one breath, one day at a time.